Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016. And after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And it's taken me quite some time to come to the mic to tell it, but I knew it was an important one to tell. So here I am to share his story and mine with you. And it's important that I tell the story of the surviving sibling, the forgotten mourner, the story that is not told enough. So thank you for coming with me on this journey. And now it's your turn to share your stories. Today, I have a very, very, very special guest with me. You guys actually heard about him on season 1. His name is Caleb. Yes, the infamous Caleb from season 1 is here today with me. Caleb is like the older brother that I've never had. You guys obviously know I have a younger brother. And
Not much older.
Is such a big... Not much older, yes, not much older, but is such a big part of the story of Andreas, my surviving sibling story, and such a big story and part of my life. So I have so many things to say, but Caleb, welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Maya. Really excited to be here. I've been following along as you've done this, and to be able to tell my story and talk about Josh and Andreas and how our lives interacted. We've been family all the way since back in college. So I'm really excited to be here, really excited to share this with you.
Yeah, I'm super excited for you to be here too. And just like I say to everyone that comes on the show and everyone who listens, it's weird to say that, right? That you're excited to be here because this is not an exciting situation to be in, right? But it's comforting to know that you're not alone, right? So today we're going to talk about Josh, the incredible Josh, your brother. So I'd love for you to kind of just give us a backstory and tell us a little bit more about Josh and who Josh is and was.
All right. Well, Josh is my brother. He was my older brother by 2 years, and we grew up in a very religious family. So it was Joshua and Caleb. So if those of y'all who know your Bible, you could put 2 and 2 together. And it really was kind of that kind of relationship. He was very quiet, very laid back. I was always the loud, boisterous one. We went through a really emotional time with the church we were at. There was a church split, and that just made him draw back even more. And so we were homeschooled after that. So we were just always together. He really was my best friend without even realizing it until I got older. I could talk to him about anything. And there were a lot of times where I would vent to him and get frustrated and think that was normal, that was the normal relationship you had with a brother. I found out that's not always the case. We had a very, very special, close relationship. As we got older, he was still the quiet, shy one. He never really said much. I would call and set up his doctor's appointments for him because he hated talking on the phone, stuff like that. But when he did find something he was passionate about and start talking, you could not get him to shut up. I would sit there, and it was usually topics way above my head, and I would just sit there and act like I was able to catch up with him, but, the brotherly thing. But and like I said, as I grew and I started experiencing things, I left for the Marine Corps. My dad told me when I got back, and I never knew this, that he just kind of got really quiet, really withdrawn, that my parents were so focused on me leaving, they didn't even realize that he'd lost his best friend. And I got out, and our relationship just grew. And as far as intelligence goes, if I had a quarter of his intellect, I would consider myself lucky. I mean, he taught himself Latin. As you know, he was called into the ministry. He was getting ready for seminary. He was just such an incredibly kind, generous person. And me being, how was it you put it, infamous, I'm not going to lie. I would push his buttons from time to time just to get a reaction. And usually he was pretty laid back about it. But if, again, like with his topics of interest, if I pushed him too far, he still knew how to put me in my place. And we just had this amazing brother relationship that they say you never know what you miss until it's gone. And that's really true. You never know that you have such a short, limited time. Sometimes people in our situation, people who have lost somebody, you think you have your whole life ahead of you. You think you have years and years of memories to make. And you don't realize that when you wake up one day, literally in the blink of an eye, all that's changed. And the only memories you have are the ones you had up until that point. And it's kind of a kick to the gut when you realize there will be no new memories, at least physically. You have to keep reliving the old ones, and you hope they're good. You hope they're good memories. But honestly, you'll live every memory, the good, the bad. You don't care. You hold on to everything you have of that person, and you live every second, day by day, and you never get tired of it. You always are there to relive those moments with those memories. That's all we have.
Yeah, I agree. And I was lucky enough to know Josh, just like you were lucky enough to know Andreas. So it's an interesting dynamic that we are able to talk about this. And I definitely, I want to talk more about Josh. And I want to say this just a little bit. So I was, again, lucky enough to meet Josh, and Josh was and is super, super smart, just like you said. But Caleb's super smart too, you guys. So he's selling himself a little bit short. But Josh and I connected over, because I am an English major, and we connected over his poetry. And the poetry that you have from him and that he wrote in his lifetime is incredible. I mean, that really showed, for me, that was how him and I connected. But in the short time that I knew him, it was such a beautiful thing.
Unfortunately, we don't have enough. Like I said, he was very quiet and very reserved. There were a few that he felt comfortable enough with putting on Facebook. And when we found those, because again, he was very, a conservative person, kept everything kind of inward. But when we found those, it would absolutely give you chills the way he used words, the way he was able to create analogies. He actually went to Bruton Parker College and got his English degree. He was teaching at a little private school, Pinewood. And his students, there were some growing pains when he first got there. But by that second year, they had really, really accepted him. And they, to this day, as a matter of fact, my last physical episodes I was having, my last ambulance ride, one of the ambulance drivers was a student of his all these years later. And he recognized my name, and he's like, was your brother Joshua? I said he was. And he said, I had Mr. Harrison for that 1 year, and he still has left an impact on every single person there. Now, this kid's graduated high school, graduated college, early 20s. And he recognized my name from my brother. And I was laying in the back of the and we had a conversation about him. He said, I'll never forget, the way he taught, the way he was able to make it relate. He said he left such an impact than teachers who have been there for years. And that was really, really amazing to hear all these years down the road. I mean, as you know, for us, we keep the memories alive. But to hear somebody else come up to you and say, hey, I remember your brother. Because as you know, as time goes on, anybody who's been in this situation, it's almost like we start feeling guilty for talking about them, for missing them so much. I've caught myself on special events, maybe not posting on Facebook, how people are tired of hearing about this. They don't want to, not that it was ever said directly, but you almost feel a guilt about constantly talking about your brother. People don't want to hear it. They're tired of hearing it. And I don't understand why we do that to ourselves, but the people I have talked to have been in this situation have expressed the same thing. Say, man, why are you living in the past? Well, the past was my brother. And it's been challenging for me to get past that. I'm very careful and very still. Well, have I mentioned them before to this group of people? Have I brought this up? I don't want to talk too much about them. And I really think that's doing us and them a disservice. That's why we have and need podcasts like yours. It's okay to talk about this. It doesn't matter if I'm 80 and still talking about my brother. That's okay.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you feeling lost in your grief journey? Perhaps even stuck? As a surviving sibling, I too have felt lost, stuck, confused, angry. Well, fill in the blank. I've felt so many emotions along my grief journey. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about too. Along the way, I found that what I needed was answers to all of my unanswered questions, validation, permission to feel everything that I was feeling at different times, and ultimately, I needed guidance. That's why I created the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. This is a 23-page guide that guides you, the surviving sibling, along your grief journey. Written and created by a surviving sibling for surviving siblings. Click the link in the show notes to get your copy or visit thesurvivingsiblings.com, where you can also find more show information, merchandise for surviving siblings like you, and more resources and support. I agree. Yeah, no, completely. We've had a guest on this season, and it's been many, many years since she's lost her sister. And I think it's just proof and really powerful that they're with you for life. It's called a grief journey for a reason, because they're with you for life, because our siblings are, Josh, how you just started explaining and talking about your relationship. He's your best friend. He was with you through all these experiences. He's your older brother. Like, nothing can take that away from you, even his death, like nothing. And just so you guys know, for reference of this story, Caleb was deeply and is deeply impacted by COVID-19 and in 2022 this year, and has been in and out of the hospital, and thank God is still with us today, because I don't know what I would have done with myself if that had not been the case.
I almost got to say Josh and Andreas shortly.
Yes, that is true. I was a wreck, you guys. I was a total wreck. But I want to talk about, I love, how crazy is that this kid was like, I know Josh. I didn't even know that. So I love that I'm finding this out. This is why we do these episodes. I
kind of held on to that. I knew you. We've been discussing being on the show.
Yeah.
I got sick, and I was like, man, I was catching up on the podcast as much as the morphine would let me. But I was like, this is such a great moment. I'm going to hold on to this one because we knew we were going to get here. So
I love that. And I love that you said that, because there were times when I was just the worry wart Maya that I am. So I'm glad that we are here and that you're doing better. But I want you to kind of go back with all of us and share with all these incredible surviving siblings and supporters that listen to this show about that time in 2009. I'll never forget it as your best friend, your sister, your supporter, but it's different for you as a surviving sibling. I was not one at the time. I was your supporter, as some of the people listening. So take us back to 2009 and what happened to Josh. You've already mentioned he was a teacher, but how did he pass, and tell us that.
All right. So a little bit of background. Like I said earlier, you always think you have forever. So I had left for the Marine Corps at 18. My parents signed when I was 17, so I left at an early age. I was caught sleepwalking, didn't work out. I was discharged, and I came back home, and my brother was there for me. This was very early on in my discharge. And then I was like, I can't stick around. There were some family issues, and him being the older one, the protector, even though big bad Marine, but he was still that emotional support, that emotional protector. And he's like, you know what? I've got it here. Go off and do your thing. Go to school. I'm where I need to be. And he really encouraged me to go to Valdosta. So I left home again, went to Valdosta, and he would come visit and we would hang out. But I never thought I would be in this situation. I found myself. He started teaching school. And then one morning, I knew he'd been sick. And so this was early September, and I had actually talked to him. He wasn't feeling well. And the next day I called, and Mom said he was too weak to talk. At that time, he was living with my parents. My mom was chronically sick. My dad had to work, so Josh was there taking care of her while teaching and doing everything that else was involved. And so in my youthfulness and, 26-year-olds don't die, I said, okay, I'll call him tomorrow. I called back the next day, and I was told he had been taken to the hospital. He had severe pneumonia. And the previous evening, he had gone to the doctor. He didn't have insurance at the time. It was a private school. And, they did what they could in the situation, but he was encouraged to go home if he had any more issues to follow up with his primary care doctor that morning. Well, that morning, the alarm was going off, and Mom said she went in there. She finally went to wake him up, and he was already turning blue. He was already suffering from loss of oxygen and air. So they got him in an ambulance, and they rushed him to Savannah. Savannah was full. They sent him to Macon when he got there. And what had happened was he had actually contacted swine flu, H1N1, complicated by and then pneumonia was setting in. And that was, I'll never forget the x-ray they showed us when we walked in. His lungs were just completely whited over, glassy. There was actually no extra room in his chest. The pneumonia had taken over. Again, 26-year-olds don't go out like that. I expected him to make a full recovery. That night, once he was settled in the hospital, I was able to talk to him very, very briefly. I did not know it would be the last time I would talk to him. I told him to get better, that he needed to come see me again in Valdosta, that actually the three of us needed to go to another pool night out at CJ's. He loved that. And he said he would, and he loved me, and he talked to me later. Again, I'm thinking, okay, it's a hiccup. No big deal. 26, he was very healthy, worked out, ate healthy. The next day, my dad called, and I could tell in the sound of his voice that he was very, very concerned, very worried. He said that they were actually going to have to put him into a medically induced coma to help him breathe. His lungs were completely shutting down. And the problem with this was the longer the machine breathed for him, the more difficult it would be for him to come out of it. So it was the best option they had at the time. My parents agreed to do what they could. They medically induced him into a coma, and for 15 days, they watched. My dad stayed at that hospital. I was still in class. I'm still in denial. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's been 2 days, 4 days, 10 days. He's holding on. He's going to do better. And then as it got closer to that 15-day mark, the stats started dropping even more and more. And the doctors came in and they said, we're not saying that this is it, but it's not looking good. Start preparing yourself. Well, for me, preparing myself was going to the liquor store and buying 3 bottles of top shelf tequila and planning on not remembering any of this if this was the final result, the end result. 2 days after I did that, we got the phone call, gather the family. Even then, you're still in denial, like, okay, we'll get there and he'll be fine. You don't want to accept the fact that this is it. You can't accept the fact that he's not going to wake up and look at you. You start to realize he's been your everything for so long and you didn't even realize it. And we got there, and y'all came down, you, Miranda, Nikki, y'all came down with me as support. Y'all showed up. We were at the hospital with my parents, and his numbers went up and down. But then that night, around 2 a.m., they came in, they called a code blue, and at that point we knew what that was, and we knew it was Josh. And they came in and they did everything they could. They led us back to a point. They didn't let us in the room. They were working on him, but we were there outside the door, and we heard the doctor say that that's it, call it. And they pronounced the time of death, and with that last breath, that was the last time that I would see my brother on this side of eternity. And you go in shock when that happens. Your brain is saying there's no possible way this did not just happen. But at the same time, it did. Your life just changed forever. And, we had those 15 days to prepare. A lot of people don't get that. Your situation, other situations, you don't get that time. You have to process it all in the blink of an eye. I know, I said when I got the phone call about Andreas, it was literally just, and you had to process all that. I had the blessing of 15 days, and that was a blessing.
That's still very fast, though. It's all perspective, right? It's all perspective, which we've heard about on this season, and we'll continue to hear about in seasons to come. But you say 15 days was a blessing. For me, I feel lucky that I got to, I changed my perception and all of this, right? That I even got to see my brother's body. I try to look at it differently now. But that's for me to say. That's not for other people to say, which we'll dive into that when you finish the actual story of it. But it's something I did want to point out as you were saying that, though. it's perspective, right? Because people listening to this are gonna be like, wow, these two really have it together. But no, that takes time, because we sure as hell didn't feel like that in the moment of, having, me having less than 3 days. And I never, even really saw him alive. I saw him dying as he came in. You had a couple words and that was it. And then it was a 15-day extended period, which I remember coming there with, ironically enough, my brother and Nikki and Miranda afterwards, when Josh had passed. But I came to the hospital before. But it was it's great that you had 15 days, but that was such a sudden situation that happened. So what was that like for you emotionally after that? I mean, you're in this I mean, it's a shock. That's a shock. You thought he could make it out, and we did too. I will never forget. It was wild, Caleb, because me being your supporter, and that's what I want everyone to know here, that are listeners, this is not just for people who are surviving siblings. These are for supporters too, because we need more supporters. And as your supporter, it was eerie because you told all of us, you were like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. We had been there for like 2 days or something. And you were like, go home, guys, go home, go home. And I got home at like midnight. I think he passed around 2 or 3 and there's something in the morning. And I was only 2 hours away at that time. And I took something to sleep, like you normally do when you're going through these traumatic things,
survival,
something. Yeah. And I wake up to all these, calls, and I felt so guilty, and, but I, realize now from the passing of time, there's nothing I could have done, right? This is your story. This isn't my story, but an interesting thing to look back on through time. But you guys, so you're there. What was next for you after realizing here you are as a family?
That's a very, very interesting question, because your body does go into survival mode. It blocks out certain events, certain times. I mean, there's so many patches in everything that was going on. You remember the people, going back to supporters, you remember the people who were there. You, Andreas, Nikki, Miranda, even though we, the other two, we haven't stayed as in close contact as I did with y'all, they were there. I remember the girl I was dating at the time, she was not to that level. It's how you support. And everybody needs support differently. And she wasn't even able to be there the way that you and Andreas were. After it all happens, your body's in shock. Your mind's in shock. You don't think it happened. You think you're dreaming. So the way I dealt with it, I do remember the drive home, staring out the window. I followed Dad the entire way home. We live 2 hours from Macon, the small town, Vidalia. Y'all may know the Onions. Right. This is after we got the news, and we sat there, and I will never forget, my dad looked up at the doctor and said, now what? I mean, that had been his life for 15 days. That had been our journey. I mean, he slept on the floor. Okay, well, now what? And they process. They say, we're going to process the body. We're going to, and at that point, Josh's soul was not there. Which we'll get to that, at the funeral. Who he was no longer in that room. But I do remember the drive home vividly, just staring out the window, and you're exhausted. You're tired. You're trying to relive the moments. You're playing the what if game. What if we had done this? What if we had this doctor? There were 2 people that came in with the exact same thing my brother did while we were there, and they caught it in time and they walked out. Well, why did they walk out and Josh didn't? You torment yourself. You start thinking, the times you push buttons just for fun. You start thinking about, well, what's he going through? What's his soul experiencing? I mean, what's he seeing right now? Does he even know what just happened? His consciousness. And you're just sitting there. And I remember on the way home, I wasn't able to cry at that point. I wasn't able to shed tears. I was in survival mode. I picked up the phone. I called my dad. He was in the car ahead of me. And I said, I want to talk at his funeral. He's like, Caleb, this just happened. Are you sure? I said, I know I want to stand up and talk. I knew right away on the ride home that I wanted to talk and say something for my brother. So he said, okay. We got home, and my way to deal with it was for 3 days to sleep as much as I can, and thinking every time I woke up, it'd be different. Because you think it's a nightmare. So you think, well, if I can just wake up enough, then it won't be the same. It'll be a different outcome. So you just sleep and you stare and you answer the messages as best you can, all of the well wishers. People stop by. I think it was a good solid 3.5 to 4 days when I was alone by myself in my room. Well, Josh's room. When I was at home, I was staying with my parents at the time. It was his room. I was staying there. And I started looking around the walls. I saw a puzzle that he did, that his very first puzzle he completed by himself. His favorite books. His grade books he still had sitting out beside the bed where he was grading papers. And when I was alone and by myself is when the emotion actually rolled in. And it all hit at one time. And I lost it. I dropped to my knees right there. And I don't even know how long I laid there, just sobbing. And my parents came to the door. They said they checked on me. I don't remember all the details, but they just kind of let me deal with it. But it's such a traumatic event that it took that long. And to be in his room, his surroundings, to process what had truly happened, knowing that he wouldn't ever step foot back in that room, at least not this physical body, and seeing how none of this was prepared or planned. Like I said, his grade books were sitting out. Life was going on as usual, as it should have, until that one moment when he was put in the hospital, when he got sick. And there's no way to truly cope with those thoughts and emotions until you're alone by yourself, because again, you put on a brave face for the people coming by. I remember at the funeral, of course, I got choked up and teared up. I couldn't tell you hardly, other than the special supporters, you, Andreas, your family that was there, that has been there the entire time. I couldn't even tell you really who was there. When I looked out from the podium, it was just a group of people. Now, they were all people I knew, people I'd grown up with, people who loved and supported Josh. But I couldn't focus on who they were. I was doing everything I could to hold it together. My body, my brain was doing things that I wasn't even aware of, so I could just function. But then when all that's over with, your body can only do that for so long. Your brain can only protect you for so long. It eventually says, okay, it's time to deal with it. And I told you I'd gone to the liquor store, and being out of the Marine Corps, I probably drank more than I should have when I was in college, more than I'd like to admit. But I walked back into that dorm room after the funeral, after I'd been home for a few days. And I was in my final year of college. And, of course, I get it, but the professor's like, oh, if you're not here, you can't get the grade. So I had no choice but to go back. It was literally my capstone class. I walked back into that dorm room. And just nothing was the same. And I saw those bottles sitting there. I was like, you know what? Josh wouldn't want that for me. He wouldn't want this. He would be so disappointed and so upset. And I poured every single one of those bottles down the drain without even touching them. That was my first step, I think, in trying to make sense of it and realize he's gone. So what am I going to do now? And I still, to this day, I still look up to him. I still make decisions based on would he approve? What would he think about this? And we didn't always see eye to eye, and he wasn't always right, but he at least had his own opinion, and he would give it to me. And it was at least well thought out, respectful, and it was for my best interest. Now, again, I may or may not have taken the advice, but it was there. And realizing I was on my own.
I'm sorry. I have to laugh a little bit at this part because I know the relationship, so I have to laugh a little bit because the dynamic between the two of you is really beautiful. And you're right, you don't always appreciate it until it's gone. And no, you didn't always take his advice, but college Maya was glad about that because we partied a lot. But anyway, I had to make you laugh in the middle of that. Anyway, I don't know if I ever knew about the bottle part of that and pouring it down, or you probably shared it with me, but I think the strength behind that story, it means a whole lot more hearing it again now where we are right in our grief journeys. So, yeah.
Actually, my roommate, Woody, you remember Woody, he came in, he's like, what are you doing? That's top shelf. I said, I explain, it's like, I don't need this right now. If I have a reason to drink, I don't need to drink. And that was really a turning point, I would say, in maturity. The
Yeah.
way I would deal with it, it would be very easy to spiral out of control in a situation like that. And he's like, well, man, give it to me. I'll drink it. And I was like, that's not the point. I need to do this for me, for Josh,
Right.
And I mean, like I said, we've talked, we've set up countless hours at night talking about Josh, Andreas, but like I said, your body it can only retain so much, and that's what I love about this podcast and hearing the stories from these people, that, like you said, certain things mean more in this setting when you focus on them. What may have been said as a casual conversation previously suddenly takes on such a different dynamic, so much more meaning. And you're like, wow, that was a real turning point. I may not have realized it back then. Nobody may have. But sitting here with you talking about this, that was really my first challenge of growth. How are you going to handle this? This has happened. It was acceptance. This has happened. You have your life ahead of you. How are you going to deal with it? Is it going to destroy you, or are you going to come out stronger and better for it? And I think, I'm sure anybody has experienced that. I mean, losing Andreas the way you did, does it drag you down too? Does it take you with it? Does one death claim two lives? And a lot of times for the surviving sibling, that can be the story. Because again, we don't know who to talk to. We don't know how to deal with this. This isn't the normal order of things. We grow old, we have kids, we die. We expect to see the end coming. So when it doesn't work out that way, it really challenges those of us who are still here. Okay, this is what you're facing. How are you going to deal with it? And I mean, like I said, you found a relief, and you're doing this, and of course many other things. This is just a small thing that's been done, but we've talked in detail little things, and every day, let's push the bottle away this time. Let's pour the tequila out this time. Let's make a decision that's going to be better for us, that they would be proud of. And that really is the start of the acceptance process. And I think the growing, the maturity of dealing with that kind of loss.
I think you said a whole lot here, so I want to talk about a couple of these things. You've mentioned a couple of different terms that I think are really huge just in grief in general, but also in the surviving sibling process, because you've talked about being in shock and kind of denial, and then also having some acceptance. And so this is something I've talked about in season 1 and then also throughout season 2. And it's the fact that, these, some people say it's 5 stages of grief. Some people say it's 7. I believe in all 7, but you're talking about something very key here. It's not linear. You're going to experience all of these factors and these feelings, these stages, whatever people want to call it. It's not a linear thing. And I see a lot of surviving siblings, like in support groups, or when I've, talked to them when they're not at the quote unquote phase that they want to be at, and they're frustrated. If I felt that way, and it sounds like you share the same sentiment, if I forced myself to be like, okay, I should be, that's a dangerous word, I should be at depression now, or I should be at, bartering now, right? Or bargaining or whatever it is. Yeah, bargaining. And you set these expectations for yourself. Like, it's really important to know, just hearing your story, Caleb, that like you went through almost the entire set of 5 or 7, whatever you believe in, right away. So you were accepting it, you weren't accepting it, you were bargaining, you were like, if I did this, what if? That's the what if phase. So that's a huge thing to unpack, I think, right here in your story, because we need to understand that, yes, there's something to that. There's a reason, we've had doctors and psychologists talk about this, but it's not a race. It's called a journey for a reason, and you're still on it and I'm still on it.
Absolutely. And you make an amazing point. And at least in my experience, which I'm sure I'm not the only one, even though we feel so alone until we come across something like this. But sometimes in the journey, you may take 4 steps back. I've noticed at one point, 1 year, his birthday rolls around, I'll be doing great. A special event, something that we shared. Some days I'll go to my cigar cabinet. We shared cigars. He loves cigars. And I can't even take a cigar out because I'm so grief stricken. So it's not it's not linear. It's not a time frame. And you may take 5 steps forward and then take 2 back. And that's okay. Just because you hit step 5 doesn't mean you can't go back to step 1. And I'm telling you, even with the time frame it's been of him being gone, 2009, I'm still forward, back. I mean, I'm still, doing the 2-step. I mean,
I love that.
And I have no rhythm. I can't dance. But I mean, it's not. And I think that's why we put so much, stress and condemnation on ourselves for, well, I should be talking about it this far. It's been 2009. We're in 2022. Let it go. But that's the thing. We don't. Why do we have to let it go? Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to push ourselves and condemn ourselves for talking about somebody that we love that meant so much to us? And I've been trying to figure out where this comes from. I mean, nobody's ever said, "Oh, quit talking about it." It's all internal. Every bit of it is, I feel the pressure. Nobody wants to hear it. I'm not sure if my dad's wife, Angie, she lost her son. In a tragic boating accident. Mm-hmm. And we were having this conversation the other day, and it was his birthday. And she's like, "Yeah, I didn't even post anything on Facebook because nobody wanted, nobody, it's been too far out. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to read it." And when we got to start talking about the same thing, well, why do you feel that way? Like, what is it in society that makes us feel that we have to get over this? Mm-hmm. We don't. Mm-hmm. It's okay for me to wake up tomorrow and fall on my knees crying because I miss my brother. He was part of my life. Why do I have to get over losing part of my soul? And, in this journey, you realize, what's become the social norm, what we've put on ourselves, what others have put on us, whether consciously or subconsciously. We're not bound to that. It's going to be different for every person. Some people, they may be okay for the majority of the rest of their life. Others may go back to step 1 4 or 5 times a year. They may never get all the way through the steps. It could be 80, 90 years old and they're still working through the process. Yeah. To say one's right and one's wrong is, to use your words, very dangerous territory. Yeah. When we start saying, okay, I handled Josh's death this way, so this is how you should handle Andreas's death. And I saw that way of thinking cause a lot of issues with my parents' marriage when Josh passed away. One grieved this way, but that wasn't good enough for the other one. My mom wanted us to grieve this way. She was very emotional. She wanted us to go release balloons and, don't get me wrong, we memorialized Josh in our own way and we kept him alive in our own way. But you can't tell me how I should honor my brother's death. If you want to honor it that way, that's fine. But you can't really put those expectations on me. And that goes back to the supporters. Are they pushing you to hurry up and get through the time frame? Or are they saying, like you and Andreas did in my situation, it's okay. Take your time. Sometimes the wrong kind of support can be the worst thing in a situation like this.
Oh, I just got chills by this. I got chills by this because I want to talk about this too, because I think, again, you've unpacked a lot of really important things. So yes, I agree. And this is why we say here on the Surviving Siblings podcast that, so to back up, and then we're going to go into your parents because this is huge. This is a big thing. But what you said is, who's to say that I'm supposed to move on, get over it? Like, these are all really toxic things. And this is why your father's wife goes through this. This is why we feel these things. And it's, I don't feel this way anymore, but I went through this. And I'm sure you feel this way sometimes too, posting about Josh, because we're talking about this. We feel like, oh, maybe someone doesn't want to hear this anymore. It's been X amount of years. Because there's this expectation that we should get over it or we should move on. Guess what, guys? Like, I'm going to say it again. I say it on a lot of episodes. You don't get over it. You can move forward. There's no moving on. There's a difference. And there's been a couple of incredible guests so far that have talked about this, and we're talking about it again because there is a consistency between all of us as surviving siblings who have come to a certain point of acceptance. And the reason we're at quote unquote acceptance is because we embrace all of these emotions and all of these parts of our grief journey. And we understand that in order to move forward, this is a part of who we are. And this is a part of our life. And this person, whether it's a brother, sister, or multiple siblings, which those of you who hear those stories, I don't even know. God love them, right? Caleb, like, I don't even know. I mean, those are, oh my gosh, please don't put me through this again, God, please. But I mean, my heart goes out to them. But, I think it's really important to understand that moving forward is the goal. Like, that's the goal, I think, for everything in life, because everything you go through is something that's going to come with the territory in life. And so I think you really said that and really touched on that in your way. And I really loved that. And then I love how you're going into the different ways of grieving. So anyway, I want to go back into what you were saying about your parents, because I think that's really important to talk about what it means to grieve differently, but also to respect that, because I think that I went through a similar type of situation where I was angry at some of my family for maybe not grieving the same way as myself. And I had to kind of grow with that and learn that they weren't understanding this concept of moving forward versus moving on. And I had to listen to, you have to move on, Maya, you have to let go. And that was very toxic for me. But now I'm in a place where 6 years later, am able to say that's their journey, this is my journey, and I'm okay with that. So I so connect with what you went through now with your mom and your dad, but I can also understand why this was difficult, because each one of them had a different style. And I understand your mom, because I think my mom and her mom, your mom, are a lot alike. It's like, let's check all the boxes. Let's do all the things so that we don't have to really feel anything, and I mean, I love your mom, and may she rest in peace, as she has passed now as well. But, I think that was kind of her mode of dealing with it. And I kind of think that was my mother's as well, which this is kind of the first time I'm opening up about this. So I'm being very vulnerable on this episode too. But I think that was her way, and I've become more accepting this year of that. That's been a thing for me, and understanding that. And so, but I just wanted to recap that and then go back to you on this, because that was a huge thing for your parents, though. It can be an issue. So talk us through that. So your mom kind of wanted to do all the things. She wanted to put everything out there.
There was a guy at the time who was traveling around, and if you paid a very small amount of money, he would put your siblings, your sons, whoever it was that passed, on his van. He had like this huge, big moving type van, and he would plaster the picture on there and drive around with it. She wanted to do stuff like that. She wanted to, commemorate, set up basically a shrine of his stuff. I mean, she wanted to keep busy so she wouldn't have to think about it. And, she would get upset. She would, y'all just want to forget about them. Y'all just want to move on, like you said, not move forward. Y'all want to just be done with it, put them in the ground and be done with it. And you touched on a very good point. You were able to accept the way she grieves, but has she accepted the way you grieve? Right. Because my mom never really accepted the way that I chose to grieve and to commemorate my brother. We were able to move past that and reestablish our relationship. But for a very, very long time, that caused a lot of issues, because I was very accepting. I told her, I said, Mom, you do what you need to do. He was your son. As a brother, I can't tell you what you're going through as a mother. It's a different dynamic. I lost a brother. You lost a son. I can't tell you what you're feeling, how to feel it, or how to act on it. But at the same time, you can't do that to me either. And she was very stubborn, as you know. And she felt that because we weren't grieving her way, that we weren't grieving at all. And unfortunately, I ran across some people supporters, air quotes, that kind of thought the same way. And again, there is potential for a lot of toxicness in a situation like this because it's so raw and people think they're trying to help, but in reality, they're causing way more damage to the situation. Mm-hmm. And we had some people jumping in with my mom. Yeah, they're wrong. They should be doing this. They should be doing this. But see, we never told her not to grieve her way. We just said, don't get mad at us if we choose to commemorate, because there is no right or wrong way to grieve somebody.
Boom. Mic drop. Mic drop. Exactly. Right there. That's what I wanted us to get at the core of, right? Right there, what you just said.
And once you accept that and you realize that, it goes back, it does away with the time frame. It does away with all these things that we face. That simple sentiment. There is no right or wrong way to grieve somebody. Demolishes all of that. You no longer have the pressure of a time frame. You no longer have social constraints. Once you understand that this is a journey, this will be a journey until I meet them on the other side, until we see Josh and Andreas and get to play pool again. And have these discussions. And oh my gosh, if y'all talk about books for hours again, at least me and Andreas are gonna go have a beer.
Disclaimer: we will. Josh and I will,
and I would expect that he would.
You guys will play pool because I'm terrible at pool, so that will be the meeting of the minds again, right? So I love that you bring levity to this. This is why this is deep and sad and fun and all of the things at the same time. But yeah, that's the point I wanted for both of us, right, to come across in this portion of the episode, is that there's no wrong way to grieve. But I have a little secondary part to this, and I want you to weigh in on this. The only wrong way to grieve is to not grieve, to not feel it, to not, right?
Yes. There is a very fine line. Well, now it's my turn to have chills. Because while denial helps you survive initially, if you stay there too long, it will tear you apart. It will tear you down. It will tear you down mentally, physically, spiritually, in every way. It will destroy every relationship you have with friends and family who are still here. You have to grieve. You have to find a healthy way to express your emotions. You know my dad. You know how he is. You know he's very quiet, reserved. He does not put his personal life out there. I was concerned with him within the first couple of weeks, very concerned. I felt like he wasn't getting it out, that he was just pulled inside him. So we sat outside on the porch one day. We had a cigar. We lit up, and we were talking. I said, Dad, are you grieving? I asked him point blank. I said, are you okay? Like, are you processing this? And he teared up. He started showing some real emotion, which for my dad's a very strange thing. And he told me, he said, yeah, he said, it's not easy. He said, I'm not out, crying in the streets, ripping my clothes. I'm not doing what your mom wants me to do. But yeah, I'm definitely grieving the loss of my son, my oldest son. And so we had that discussion. And as a supporter, and again, it's so weird finding yourself, because my parents lost a son. I was going through it and a supporter, just like you were with your family. You're dealing with it. You're trying to survive yourself, but yet you still feel that need to be there for your family as well. So we played both roles. We're trying to survive, but we find ourselves supporting the other family members. And it's a very, very unique dynamic when you're going through this, because you play both roles. And you have to be careful with how you play both roles. And, it's such new territory because you don't expect to go through this. And, but that's the thing. And if you don't check in and say, hey, I'm not asking you how, I'm not asking you what you're doing, but are you grieving? Are you processing this as best as you can? That's a very, very important question to ask. And that's not one anybody going through this process would ever get offended at. They would understand why you're asking that. Hey, this is very traumatic. Are you grieving? Now, there are some things you do get offended at, people say during this. Everything happens for a reason. Yeah,
Let's not say those things, right? I mean,
right.
gosh.
There are certain things that America trying to help y'all stop.
Right.
All we just two
Disclaimer.
two words. 2 words. This is all we need to hear. I'm here.
Yeah.
That's it. Not
And then actually be there, and then actually follow through.
follow through. Not the thoughts and prayers, and then you disappear and never hear from you again. But a genuine I'm here. And then if that's needed, don't push, don't pry, I'm here. That's all we need to hear. That's all we need to know. And that is what we will remember. I remember you and Andreas, y'all were there. It sounds like it's such a simple thing, but that's not what we're wired to do. We want to offer advice. We want to make it better with words. We want to fix the problem. We want to, take the grief away. We want to really support, but that's not what's needed. This is our journey. This is, our time to deal with it and to find out truly who you are. When you lose a sibling, you find out who you are very quick. Very quick.
Oh my God, you just made me so emotional. That hits so deep with me, and I'm sure for all of you guys listening, I would imagine it hits you deeply as well, because yes, yeah, I love what you just said. It really does, because God, I don't even know how to follow that. But you really do. You find out who you really are, and on a different level. How do you even describe it? I think anybody listening
you can't.
That's a surviving sibling gets
it's
it.
what we have. Mm-hmm. It's ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ours.
You know what I mean. Our little club.
And if you're a supporter, this is my new term that I'm using. I love that you've just embraced this, Caleb. That means it makes sense to you, because, guys, disclaimer, I did not tell him this term before coming on the show at all. But there are supporters, and that's so important. But I love how you said that we become supporters too, because that's the challenge in the dynamic, right? Because we are going through such a significant loss, right? Our first friends in life, our first enemies in life, right? Because we fight with our siblings and everything that goes on, our first rivals, our first all those things, but also our first confidants, our first imaginary friends, they become real as our sibling, all these fill in the blank. They're gone, but now we have to be a supporter for our parents, who are our role models and everything to us. And that's huge. That's a huge role to be asked of us. And I think we need to give our parents some grace, because I don't know that they always know that that's being asked of them, right? Which is a whole probably other episode, but that's a big thing for surviving siblings to take on. But you've mentioned Andreas a whole lot, so I do want to talk about this. I don't know if we've talked about this in a long time, but I do want to talk about this because I talked about it on season 1, so I want to bring it up. And I want to go back to the funeral a little bit. So Andreas and I were at the funeral for Josh, of course. And again, I brought this up on season 1, and it's very eerie, because I remember you were up there giving the eulogy, the talk about Josh, and I was just watching you. It was so emotional. Because we came the day before for the viewing, and I remember turning towards my brother and tiptoeing up, because even I had heels on, but Andreas was very tall, very in his physical body, right? Super tall, well over 6 foot. And I still don't even know exactly how tall he was. He was definitely over 6'1", but anyway, he was tall. And I remember telling him, I was very emotional when you were speaking. I was emotional at the viewing, but when you were speaking, and I remember telling him, I don't know if I could ever live if this ever happened to you. I don't think I. And I remember without hesitation, he turned towards me and down towards me. And maybe we were sitting back down at this point. I don't know. Maybe I think he's standing, because, this is 2009, guys. Give me some slack here. Cut me some slack. It's 13 years ago now. But And I remember him going, don't worry. Like, he held my hand so tightly. And I know we've talked about this before, but to bring it up again, it's like in this detail. But he said, don't worry. Like, this will never be us. Like, this will never happen. He's like, I'm always going to be here for you. And like, I sit here right now just in complete, I don't even know. There's no words to say, because there was this depth in our relationship that through the highs, the lows, you guys have listened to it, there's season 1, I don't need to explain it, but that was such an eerie moment for me. And I feel like in that moment, I felt you, and you and I were so connected, and I couldn't even imagine being in your situation. And then fast forward to 2016, I was standing in your situation, and I didn't think I would be able to survive it. And I had a completely new perspective on it going through it. But the reason I bring this up again, and I reiterate this part of the story again in season 2, having you on here, is because there's a secondary part to this. And I don't know that I've ever told you about this. But so here's the surprise for you on this, okay? So that happened, right? And that was a lot, and it came twofold, right? It came all back around, because there you were holding my hand as I was reading and crying and reading my brother's eulogy on the rock, right? Where I go and throw the sunflowers every year and drink the champagne, as I shared in my special edition episode this season. But there was an interesting thing that happened. So my grandfather died right after your brother died. So your brother died in late September. And of course, you know this. You'll never forget that day. And my grandfather died in early November of 2009. And I never thought about, I was a pallbearer in the funeral. I went up there. It was a sad day, of course, and it was a lot of death that was happening in my life. And then I went through another death, which was, there's always like 3s that happen. But I remember one of our really good friends, who you mentioned earlier, but I'm not going to say any names because that's not the point of the story. But it's a surviving sibling situation. I remember this particular person saying to you, she called me up and told me, she said, I talked to Caleb. And I said, about what? And she said, about the fact that he hasn't called you about your grandfather dying. And I remember going, why the hell would he do that? I'm like, what? Like, why? Like, why? Or even like something just like, well, what? And she's like, well, I told him he should be contacting you and talking to you. And even though I didn't have a full grasp of what it was like to lose my sibling, especially in a traumatic, sudden way where you have no way of processing it, I knew at that time that there's a significant difference between losing your 90-something-year-old or 92, 93, however old he was, grandfather, compared to losing your 26-year-old brother. And my brother was 27, which still is eerie to me too. They were almost the same exact age. Still eerie to me to this day. But I don't think I've ever told you that before, because I shrugged it off. Why would you? Why would you even be in that state of mind? I had zero expectations on you to do that. So I think again, I wanted to bring that up to you. It came to me, it was kind of like driving thoughts or shower thoughts that I remembered this. It's like we were gearing up for this. And I'm like, oh my God, this is really wild. But, and it's no shame to the person that said this to me or anything like that, because they just don't know. But it's bringing awareness to people, right? And I always say too that there's no grief that's less than one or the other. Like, grief is grief, but it's also being aware of your surroundings in life. And grief is no different. Why would I think, or why would I have the expectation of you as my brother from another mother and father to call me and be like, "Hey, I'm so sad that your grandfather lived this full life for 90 something years, and when you just lost your brother like suddenly just over a month ago." I don't have that expectation of you. So I think it's really a story of resetting expectations, but I wanted to share that with you because it was I totally put it out of my mind and forgotten about it.
I remember, again, I'm not going to say names. Hopefully y'all forgot. But no, I remember the conversation with said individual. I do. And that had actually kind of set me off because I felt like she was meddling. Now that you bring that up, again, you and I had been through a lot at this point. I mean, aside from losing Josh, I mean, just college alone, we had been through so much, which that could fill 6 new podcasts. But you knew I was there for you. Again, it's that expectation. Why was she imposing her expectation onto what I should or shouldn't do when we weren't even thinking that way? And it's part of that mentality of, well, it's been long enough for me. I should be able to be there for somebody else. Newsflash, it took years before I could be there for somebody else. There's still ways I can't be there for somebody else. I mean, I'm still struggling with that. The first funeral, other than my grandma's, of course, she, again, full life, healthy. The first funeral that I would have even stepped foot back into, I couldn't because of COVID, would have been my mom's. I don't go to funerals. I can't do that. It's just something that's not how I want to remember them. And it's not that I'm being callous or don't care. I'll go to my dad's, I'll go to yours, and that's about it. It never even crossed my mind to step into another funeral until my mom passed. Of course, like I said, I couldn't go there, but that's just not how I want to remember that person at all. And it's funny because we touched on this earlier. When Josh passed, we were outside the room, and it really was almost instantly. He wasn't there. It was just a body. When we were preparing for the final goodbyes for the physical body, I remember standing over the casket. We had open casket for us in the back. Y'all were back there, you and Andreas. But because of the oxygen he was on, his facial tissues had really swollen up. They'd shaved half his beard. It wasn't Josh. We didn't want people to see him that way. So my uncle went and found a picture really quick, printed it out, and we decided to close the casket. But I was standing there, and I very, very vividly remember his tie was crooked. So I reached down and fixed it. And later on, I was like, how could you do that? That wasn't my brother. That was a physical shell. To touch on the chilling moment you were talking, Andreas squeezing your hand, saying, I'll always be here. He didn't break that promise. Josh didn't leave me. I'm not alone. I'm not without a brother. He doesn't have his physical body at this time, but my brother's with me in every thought, in every prayer, in every day of my life. And I see him, I feel him, I communicate with him because of his memories and who he is. And they don't, I think that's how part of that maturing process is we realize, yes, they're physically gone, and we hate that, and we're truly devastated by it. But we also see them in every day, in everything they do. We don't forget them. We don't just move on. And they are always with us. They are always here. Every single second, every breath I take, my brother's here with me. Andreas is with you. It's a sense of loss in a way that I can't pick up the phone and call them. I'll never be able to do that. That doesn't mean I can't talk to them. That doesn't mean that I can't have conversation with them. I can't go to them for advice. Because even in the short time we had together, and you're in a very unique situation where you were the older sibling. Andreas would, you felt that protection, that, mama bear. Don't mess with my younger brother. Whereas I was the younger one. So Josh was that for me. So many a time I'll be laying here. I know when I was in the hospital and I was struggling, wondering if I was going to be seeing him anytime soon. I would just talk to Josh, hey, I'm in a tough spot here. What would you do? How would you want me to get through this? How would you approach this situation? And it was always with just the calm quietness. And that's still there. That communication, that line of communication is still there. That knowing he's with me is still there. Knowing that I'm going to see him again is still there. And I will miss him with every single breath I take on this side of eternity. But when I take my final breath, they'll be right there waiting for us. And that really becomes a real truth when you lose somebody. We don't really think about what moves on. What are they experiencing? What are they seeing? Because it's not part of our everyday realm. We're wired to focus on what's in front of us. But in a way, them passing has actually opened us up more than most people, because we start to think about these things. We start to wonder about these things. It really brings a very different spiritual aspect into it that most people don't ever really stop and think about, because they're, put food on the table, daily grind. But we're able to slow down and say, you know what? There's more. There's more to this. There's more to the story. And we actually are able to get this very spiritual impact and experience that people who haven't been through this don't get. They don't understand it. And it really grows you and matures you in who you are. And as much as I miss Josh and would give anything to hear his voice one last time, the person I've become on this journey through his death, I feel like has made me somebody he would be proud of, or maybe I wasn't before. Maybe because of our different personalities, this grew me in ways that I wouldn't have grown. And it really is, like I say, just having that aspect too is just really, really interesting. And as you get older and understand it more, like I said, I wouldn't trade some of what I've been through for anything, because it's made me who I am. It's made me understand a lot more than I ever would have being who I was.
I think what you're saying is so deep and so difficult to say and so difficult to get to. I know it's emotional, but I think what's important to talk about here and to call out here is we're not saying that typical, like, everything happens for a reason. No. Like block those things from you, like those people, like, no, like, and we're also not saying, like, I believe in life, like, with like the more surface stuff. Yes, I do think everything happens for a reason. Like, you go from one job to another. Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about something much deeper here. We're talking about losing a sibling. This is deep, right? But I'm not saying that Josh was meant to pass in the way that he passed. I'm not saying Andreas was meant to pass in the way that he passed. That's not for me to make that call on. But what I think that you're articulating in such a beautiful way, Caleb, is that you don't know. You're not the determining factor in that deep of a decision in, everything happens for a reason at that level. But you're saying with what has happened, you wouldn't trade who you are now because of everything that you've been through. And I think that we all need to understand, as surviving siblings and supporters listening to this right now, that this happened for you in 2009. This is a journey. But mine happened for me in 2016. And I think I just got to that point really last year. And I know you've been on this journey with me, and I'm still feeling that more and more every day and feeling stronger and stronger every day. And then there's some days I feel super weak and I'm like, I'm going to sit in bed today and just have a little bit of wine and drink, and not an unhealthy way, guys, but, and have a girl's day with my doggos, and watch some movies or do whatever is good for me, or go out with my friends or do something like that. I still have some days where I need to check in with myself. So that's a point, but I think you're making such a strong point here that I want to point that out, because you're not saying everything happens for a reason. Like, you're not a greeting card or like a plaque that you hang up in a house. It's much more complicated than that. but it's how we go forward with this and how we, choose to progress as a person with this. And it doesn't mean we're perfect, but you're able to look back now and say, yeah, Josh is with me. He's proud of me. And I agree 150%. And I love how you talk about the fact that you speak to him, because I did a TikTok recently, and when you guys are listening to this, I'm sure I will have done many, many more, but I'm asking people and telling people how I talk to my brother all the time. And that was life-changing for me. Was it life-changing for you when you started to actually talk and vocalize like out loud? Because I didn't talk to Andreas right away. Like, did you start talking to Josh right away?
No, I did not actually. The first time I vocalized any of what I was feeling, I was actually working with hospice at the time. This was months down the road. And I was the first one in the office. And the door kept opening. I shut it. I made sure it latched. It opened. I went back, locked it. It opened. And I was like, Josh, is that you? Are you picking on me? Like, yeah. And so it was very weird to do that. But that was actually the first time I was able to vocalize it, make a joke out of it. My personality, who I am. But I stopped. And I said, okay, all joking aside, like, what do I want to say to you right now? Like, all kidding, because, I was like, who's that? But all that aside, like, I miss you. I hate that I can't pick up the phone. Something good happens in my life, and I can't pick up the phone and call you and tell you. And no, it was not. It was well after what happened before I started vocally speaking to him. And the first couple of times, it caught me off guard. And again, I don't know if that's a social thing or what, but that's just how it was for me. Other people's experience may be different. But once I got through that barrier, now, every year on the day he would die, I would text his cell phone, I love you and I miss you. This year I got a text back. They had recycled his number finally. Somebody had it. And so I had to explain what had happened. My brother passed away and everything. But just sending that physical text, and they told me, they said, hey, as long as we have this number, feel free to message it anytime you want to talk to him. But sending that physical text, we used to text back and forth all the time. He was a teacher, so he couldn't call. So we'd text, and he'd answer me when he could. That was kind of our communication through the day. And so to send that text the very first time, I think that was part of this emotional growth. And like we said earlier, something like this either makes you or breaks you. And fortunately, it didn't break me. And that's where I was going with the who I am today. Like, I could have very easily ended up with a bottle in each hand and drink myself to death. He was my everything. But the act of talking to him, getting back to that, the act of talking to him, it's so therapeutic. I'm a communications major, so to actually physically put words to my thoughts and not just be thinking, oh, Josh, I miss you, but saying out loud, Josh, I miss you. I wish you were here. Today's been a rough day. Today's been hard. I hope it's been better for you. And having that conversation. And the thing is, Maya, it's not a one-sided conversation. I may not physically hear his response from his voice, from, what he was here physically, but I know that he's aware, he hears, and he knows I'm talking to him. I've never felt like I'm just sending words out into the void at all. Like, it doesn't feel like a fruitless activity, like I'm trying to convince myself. It really is just a very raw, vulnerable, open moment. And in that time, in those moments, it doesn't feel one-sided at all. It never has. And it's just been, like I said, just going through this has just been, there have been moments. There have been moments that you just had to step back and you're just floored. And, to the normal person hearing me say that, oh, that sounds crazy, that mysticism. It's not like that.
But it's not like that. No, I totally understand what you're talking about, because like I didn't speak out loud to Andreas either, my brother. I don't even remember the first time that I did. I love that you remember the first time. I don't know that I remember the first time. It was all like in my head. So you want to sound crazy? Now I sound crazy. I was talking to him, like I would, in my head, I'd be like, come into my dreams, come into, maybe I would like, maybe the words would come whispering out of my mouth and I didn't realize it, right? Or something, but not consciously being like, I miss you. I love you. Give me a sign. But that came through time. I want to say it was at least 2 years or so. I don't know. You guys can check me and tell me in season 1, because I know when I tell the story chronologically, it comes to me a little bit more easily because, I'm a writer, so that's how it works for me. But
you writers.
I know, right? Our planners and writers, what are you going to do with us, right? But, I know that in the past 2.5 to 3 years, I've spoken to him out loud very consistently, maybe a little bit longer than that, but consciously at least 2.5 to 3 years. And it's a game changer. It really is. But I also feel like, to your point too, there's kind of one event that does happen that pushes you to that. And I think for me, it was a dream. For you, it was that door. I love this door story that you're telling. It's awesome. It's so Josh too. I love it. I love that. But for me, I think it was a dream. I get visited by Andreas in dreams. That's always been my thing. So I'm not shocked that was probably, and I think I started with saying to him, like, visit me in a dream and tell me this, or, and he's very stubborn, so he didn't always show up, but, then I would start.
He always was.
Yeah, in his physical
his
body,
timing,
right?
not yours.
Oh, absolutely. He's not going to
when he was ready.
My time. Yeah, for sure. It's so him. But, I found that for me, just cathartically, then speaking it out how I felt, and now it's, not an everyday practice anymore, but really when I was starting to go through and definitely producing this podcast at the very beginning, it was a multi-time through the day focus, because I was like, do you want this? Do you want me to do this? And there were consistent things, but I connect so much, and I hope you guys do as well, with what you're saying, Caleb, with you don't feel alone. It might sound a little woo-woo to the supporters that listen to the podcast, but there is something to it. You feel their presence. You feel validated. And it doesn't necessarily mean that like your coffee mug went flying off the table. Like, I'm not saying I'm psychic, I don't know. I do have dreams that come to fruition, but that's not the podcast we're on right now. But, it's a comforting thing. And I do believe, just like you do, that they are still with us, and you do get that feeling when you speak it out loud. I think it's healthy. I really do.
Absolutely. Like I said, I'm not expecting, like I said, to see anything fly through the air, but okay, I work for the post office. Probably shouldn't say that, but I do. And let's just say there are many a day I get home and I talk to myself, just let it out. It's different than when I address something to Joshua, when I am, actively communicating with him. It's completely different. I mean, I know I'm talking just to talk, but when I talk to him, like I said, I know it's being heard. It's not just words being spoken. It's just that connection that siblings will always have. It's always going to be there. And it just goes back to why it affects us so much when they leave, but why them leaving has such an impact on who we are. And I think that's really just, it's all interconnected. It's all intertwined, and this dot leads to that dot. And sometimes the dots don't make sense. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes the picture's confusing. It just looks like a bunch of lines and scribbles. But over time, those lines and scribbles become the whole picture. And you start to see how this fits here, how this fits here, how this changed here. I mean, you really just see the morphing of the pieces as they come together. And they do come together. And sometimes you lose a few pieces and you can't find them for a very long time. But eventually the puzzle will be complete and you'll see the whole picture and it'll all make sense. It just takes time. It's that journey.
You guys can probably tell why we've been friends for as long as we've been friends. Because because we talk in these very, we like to tell stories in a very linear way, but we also have a lot of metaphors that we use. So you can probably tell why
I have Josh to thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I know. Andreas was quite the storyteller too. I feel like they come through to us, especially when we talk about this topic, which is very interesting. But no, I get what you're saying with that too, Caleb, because, someone who, like, if some of you guys have recently lost some, like your sister or brother, or God forbid, multi-siblings, you may be thinking, there's a lot of them out here. You guys are listening. I know it's a lot. You may be thinking, what are they talking about? These puzzle pieces will come together. It will start to make sense. It's not the puzzle that you thought. So I'm going to add to yours and let me know what you think about this. And then I'm going to ask you a question. But it's not the puzzle that you started out making. It's going to be a different puzzle, right? Right? But it's going to come together, right? It's going to come together. But it's just not the puzzle that you thought.
It's not the one you see on the box. It's not the one you think you're getting. It's a surprise.
It's a surprise. But you know what you think, to add even more to this? This is why we are our brother sister, You think that you're missing pieces. That's what you think. And you think you don't want to finish your puzzle sometimes. You really do on this journey. You really do. That's why I love your puzzle analogy. But keep going, because it might not be, let's say you're doing the Eiffel Tower like puzzle. It may turn out to be, I don't know, the Mediterranean Sea instead. But that's not so bad either. It's just a different journey.
A different view, a different look.
Different perspective.
Same beauty, different picture, that's all. And they all are beautiful in their own way. There is no bad picture. It may be a surprise. It may catch you off guard, but at the end, you're going to see it for what it is. And see, my brother loved puzzles. I told you about the puzzle. The very first puzzle he completed by himself. So that's why it kind of rings with me. But the puzzle, there's going to be beauty in it, no matter what it turns out to be. And like you say, there may be days you just want to turn the table over and be done with it. But if you stick with it, you're really, really going to appreciate the end result there. I truly believe that.
I agree, because what you'll find on this journey, to your point, is it's your puzzle to finish, right? It's your journey to finish. And it will feel like you're missing pieces, because you're missing your sibling. But keep going, because I feel like it's kind of like almost a fantasy or euphoric kind of show or TV show or something, where you keep getting the puzzle pieces, and it's a new puzzle. And you're going to miss that other puzzle, but you've got another one to build, and you can keep building on it. So, Josh, this metaphor is for you, because I feel like you would love this one, right? He would love this.
He would, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Well, Caleb, we've unpacked a whole lot here, and I just
that we have
your vulnerability, of course, on the podcast, but of course in our relationship. We've been friends for a very long time, but I want to ask you, before we close this out, a big question for all of the incredible surviving siblings that listen to this, and the supporters, as we've dubbed them. And you guys are incredible as well, because this is not an easy thing to go through.
Mm-hmm. It's not.
This, again, big question.
Okay. Well, put me on the spot. There we go.
Don't put you on the spot, right? What do you wish that you knew? Like, what do you wish you knew before going through those 15 days with Josh, before losing Josh in September of 2009? What is something, if you could go back in time and tell that Caleb, that college Caleb with the tequila, pouring out the tequila, all of those things, what's some wisdom that you could give yourself, or even what's some wisdom to add kind of a part two to it? What's some wisdom that you would give yourself maybe after the dust settles, right? Because there's a lot of our listeners here that are fresh in their journey, in the surviving sibling journey. And that's where I find myself giving a lot of advice. I'm by no means a clinical psychologist here, but I can share my journey. So would love to hear, kind of those two parts, kind of part A and part B, like what do you wish you knew before? I mean, because we never expect to go through this. We prepare for our parents, we prepare for our grandparents, we prepare for, but we don't prepare for our siblings. And then kind of, maybe part B, like what do you wish you would have known for, leaving the hospital, leaving the funeral, like the what's next kind of part. So would love to hear that from you.
Wow, it's not an easy question, is it? Just throw it out there like that. So first part, what comes to mind right away when you say, what do I wish I had known, or what I've done differently? Memories. Like you said, you never know when the last breath is going to be, when it's going to happen. And I spent so much time in my younger days trying to get out of this town, focusing on the future. Suddenly, I didn't have a future with my brother. And we had some great times and some amazing memories. But I would say slow down. If you have the relationship like you and Andreas, not saying we didn't have our moments where we wanted to kill each other, but we were close. Make those memories. Enjoy the here, not always looking to the future. Those memories are all we have when somebody's gone. And as many as I have, I wish I had 10,000 more. Slow down. If you have a sibling that you're close with, and that, don't be so quick to, get away. Oh, well, we'll make time later. We'll catch up later. Go to lunch now. Go grab a drink, grab a beer, have a conversation on the phone, FaceTime. Technology has gotten so much more advanced. Keep those connections strong. And if, God forbid, this does happen to a supporter that hasn't had to go through this yet, if it does happen, those connections and those memories are going to be key in whether or not this makes you or breaks you. For me, it's about those memories. I was so quick to run away from home, and Josh has it. Josh will take care of everything there. He has the responsibility. And I should have just slowed down and really enjoyed the time that I had. And of course, that's something, looking back, but yeah, I would slow down, make those memories. They only take seconds to make, but they can literally mean everything when that person is gone. And part B kind of rolls into it. Slow down. Don't try to finish this journey. Don't try and force the pieces when they don't fit. It's just accept the fact that this will probably take until the day you die. Enjoy what you have. Make those memories and just slow down. Don't force step 7 if you're not past step 1. Stay where you're at. Find comfort where you're at. Slow and steady wins the race, and this may not be a race we ever win, and just accept that. Accept that this is how life is, and embrace that. And once you slow down and you move slowly and consistently through this process, you're going to come out the other side so much better, because you're not putting that pressure on yourself to be here, to be there. Well, okay, it's 5 years. I shouldn't be on step 2. Well, maybe step 2 is what you need. Maybe you just need to slow down and embrace step 2. So for me, and like I say, every journey is different, but they kind of roll together. I was so quick to grow up and get away that I feel like I lost a lot of memories I could have had. And then trying to get better, air quotes again, missing a lot of moments that I need to grieve properly. If you rush grief and you move too quickly through it, it will catch up with you. You cannot outrun it. It may be a few years down the road, but it will catch up with you. So slow down where you're at and just stay where you're at and find comfort where you're at. It's okay to be where you are. So on the spot, that's the best I can do.
I think you did an amazing job. That's incredible. And thank you for doing your part A and part B, because I think as I've continued to do these interviews, I've realized there's kind of a part A and a part B to it, because I kind of wish you knew before. I mean, how could you ever prepare for before? But there's also a part of wanting to know the after, part of it. And I love your advice about slow down, because I just think as a society as a whole here, and we're both in America, but I think this is international advice because you guys are all around the world, that we just are moving so fast with social media, technology, and that's not all a bad thing. But when it comes to something that has been around since the beginning of time, that is a bad thing. It can be a negative thing, because we need to embrace what is natural to us. And grief is something that has been around from the beginning. And so we need to go with our instincts and what's natural to us, and slowing down and being, if you go through something quickly, that's okay. But if you need time for it, slow down and be in the moment with it. So I think your advice is really beautiful, and I really appreciate you taking the time to explain that to everyone listening, the surviving siblings and also the supporters, because it's something I wish I knew, because I put a lot of pressure on myself going through this in, most of 2017 was really my time. And I was like, why the heck am I not over this? Why am I not feeling this? Why am I not? I didn't know at the time, toxic terminology, right? Things that I didn't realize were toxic. Well, here I am, 2022, talking about it, and I've accepted it, but you know what? I haven't moved on, but I'm okay. I've moved forward. So I absolutely love your advice. I think that is amazing, and I think Josh is very proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Like I said, for the topic it is, I've had a great time. This has been absolutely amazing.
Well, I know that you are definitely on social media, so if people want to connect with you, I know that you are in my social media group, the Surviving Siblings podcast group, but why don't you tell everybody how they can connect with you? Mostly on Facebook is where you're most active, so why don't you tell
That's the majority of what I do on social media. If you do send me a message and I don't respond right away or add me as a friend, there is a good chance one of my accounts has gotten banned, my primary account, from stuff I posted 13 years ago. Got a warning today. I was like, oh, that was funny. But no, it's Caleb Harrison, CALEB, HARRISON. Feel free to stop by, shoot me a message, add me as a friend. I'd be more than happy to, if I can offer even the smallest amount of peace in a time like this, I'm more than happy to do so. I mean, if it's just a conversation, if it's sharing a quick joke, whatever it is, please feel free to reach out, because it's a much larger community than we realize, but it's also mostly ignored. And I think it's that fast-paced world, okay, time's over. Well, it's not. So anybody ever wants to reach out, feel free. I'm on Facebook. Like I said, I have other accounts. I'm not ever on them. So feel free to look me up.
That's your go-to, and we'll tag that in the show notes. And of course, and he's also in the new Surviving Siblings podcast group, so you guys can find him there too. So Caleb, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being my older brother, and I love you so much. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.